What if I told you that one of the most powerful empires in human history might be planning its comeback? The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, but today whispers of its return are growing louder than ever. Are we witnessing the early stages of a new Soviet resurrection, or is this just wishful thinking from nostalgic politicians? Welcome back to Facto PX, where we dive deep into the world's most fascinating mysteries and uncover truths that might surprise you. Today, we're exploring one of the most intriguing geopolitical questions of our time. Could the Soviet Union actually return by 2030? Before we begin, let me be clear. This isn't about conspiracy theories or wild speculation. We're going to examine real political movements, economic partnerships, and cultural shifts happening right now across the former Soviet territories. The evidence might shock you. To understand whether the Soviet Union could return, we first need to grasp what made it so powerful in the first place. The USSR wasn't just a country. It was a superpower that spanned 11 time zones, controlled vast natural resources, and influenced global politics for nearly 7 decades. When the Soviet Union dissolved on December 25, 1991, it didn't just disappear quietly. It fractured into 15 independent republics, each taking a piece of what was once the world's largest country by land area. Russia inherited the biggest chunk, along with the nuclear weapons, the permanent UN Security Council seat, and most of the geopolitical influence. But here's what's fascinating. Many of these newly independent nations never really moved away from Russia's sphere of influence. In fact, some have been moving closer together in recent years, creating what some experts call Soviet Union 2.0. Though they'd never use that term publicly. Let's start with the most concrete evidence of Soviet-style integration happening right now. In 2015, Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan formed the Eurasian Economic Union, or EAEU. On the surface, it looks like a simple trade bloc, similar to the European Union. But dig deeper, and you'll find something much more ambitious. The EAEU allows for free movement of goods, services, capital, and workers between member countries. It's creating a common market with over 180 million people and a combined GDP of approximately $5 trillion. That's not small change. We're talking about an economic powerhouse that rivals major global economies. What makes this particularly interesting is how closely it mirrors the economic integration that held the Soviet Union together. The same transportation networks, energy pipelines, and industrial supply chains that connected these regions during Soviet times are being revitalized and expanded under the EAEU framework. President Putin has been surprisingly open about his ambitions for this union. In 2011, he wrote an article calling for the creation of a Eurasian Union that would be a powerful supranational association capable of becoming one of the poles in the modern world. Those are bold words that echo the global ambitions of the former Soviet Union. Economic integration is just one piece of the puzzle. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, represents the military dimension of this potential reunion. Established in 1992, but formalized in 2002, the CSTO includes Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Armenia. This isn't just a paper alliance. CSTO forces have conducted joint military exercises, shared intelligence, and even intervened in regional conflicts. In 2022, CSTO peacekeepers were deployed to Kazakhstan during civil unrest. The first time the organization had sent troops to restore order in a member country. The level of military cooperation between these nations is remarkable. They share defense technologies, coordinate border security, and maintain integrated air defense systems. In many ways, their militaries are more closely aligned today than they were in the final years of the Soviet Union, when the central government was losing control. If we're looking for evidence of Soviet reunification, Belarus offers the most compelling case study. Under President Alexander Lukashenko, who has ruled since 1994, Belarus has steadily moved closer to Russia across multiple dimensions. The two countries have signed numerous integration agreements, creating what they call a union state. This goes far beyond typical international partnerships. They've coordinated their tax systems, synchronized their legal frameworks, and even discussed adopting a common currency. Russian and Belarusian citizens can live and work freely in either country without visas or work permits. Most remarkably, in 2020, Russia provided crucial support to Lukashenko during massive protests against his rule. This intervention helped maintain a government that likely would have fallen without external support, demonstrating the lengths Russia will go to preserve its sphere of influence. The integration between Russia and Belarus has accelerated dramatically since 2020. They've coordinated their responses to international sanctions, jointly developed military technologies, and even discussed constitutional changes that could facilitate further political integration. One aspect that makes Soviet reunification more plausible than other historical reunification scenarios is the deep cultural and linguistic connections that persist across the former Soviet space. Russian remains the lingua franca across much of the region, with over 260 million Russian speakers worldwide, many of them outside Russia itself. In Kazakhstan, for example, Russian is still widely used in business and education, despite efforts to promote the Kazakh language. In Armenia, Russian cultural influence remains strong, partly due to economic migration and shared media consumption. Even in countries that have explicitly tried to distance themselves from Russia, like Ukraine and Georgia, significant Russian-speaking populations maintain cultural ties to Moscow. These cultural connections create what political scientists call soft power, the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion. Russian television, literature, music, and social media continue to shape public opinion across the former Soviet territories, creating a shared information space that transcends national borders. Perhaps the most compelling argument for potential Soviet reunification lies in the economic relationships that survived the USSR's collapse. Many former Soviet republics remain heavily dependent on Russia for energy, trade, and investment. Take energy dependency as an example. Russia supplies natural gas to most of its neighbors at subsidized prices, creating economic relationships that are difficult to break. Belarus, Armenia, and several Central Asian countries receive Russian energy at prices significantly below market rates. This isn't just business. It's a form of economic statecraft that creates lasting dependencies. Labor migration tells a similar story. Millions of workers from Central Asia and other former Soviet republics work in Russia, sending remittances home that often represent 20–30% of their home country's GDP. For Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, remittances from Russia are literally keeping their economies afloat. These economic ties create powerful incentives for political alignment. Countries that challenge Russian interests often find themselves facing economic pressure through energy cutoffs, trade restrictions, or limits on labor migration. However, before getting carried away with reunification scenarios, it is important to examine the significant obstacles standing in the way. The most obvious challenge is that many former Soviet republics have absolutely no interest in giving up their independence. Ukraine provides the starkest example of this resistance. The 2014 Euromaidan Revolution and subsequent conflict demonstrated that significant portions of former Soviet territory are willing to fight rather than accept renewed Russian dominance. Similar, though less dramatic, resistance exists in Georgia, Moldova, and the Baltic states. The European Union and NATO have also been active in the former Soviet space, offering alternative partnerships to countries seeking to escape Russian influence. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania joined both organizations and have successfully integrated with Western Europe. Their success serves as a model for other former Soviet republics seeking a different path. Economic realities also work against reunification. Many former Soviet republics have diversified their economies and found new trading partners. Kazakhstan, for example, has developed strong economic ties with China, while Armenia has benefited from diaspora investment from Western countries. One of the most significant developments that could affect potential Soviet reunification is China's growing influence in Central Asia. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has invested billions of dollars in infrastructure projects across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and other former Soviet republics. This creates a complex triangular relationship. Russia wants to maintain its traditional sphere of influence, but China offers economic opportunities that Russia often cannot match. For countries like Kazakhstan, Chinese investment provides an alternative to Russian dependency while avoiding the political conditions that might come with Western partnerships. As some analysts describe, former Soviet republics are increasingly skilled at playing major powers against each other, maximizing their benefits while minimizing their dependence on any single partner. Another major obstacle to Soviet reunification is demographics. Russia itself faces significant population decline, with deaths exceeding births for more than a decade. This demographic crisis limits Russia's ability to project power and maintain influence across a vast territory. Moreover, the populations of many former Soviet republics have grown increasingly distinct in their national identities. Younger generations in countries like Kazakhstan, Armenia, and even Belarus often identify more strongly with their national cultures than with shared Soviet heritage. Language policies reflect this trend. Several former Soviet republics have elevated their national languages while reducing the official status of Russian. These changes might seem symbolic, but they represent deeper shifts in national identity that work against reunification. As we were approaching 2025, several geopolitical trends are shaping the possibility of Soviet reunification. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has actually strengthened ties between Russia and some of its allies, particularly Belarus and the Central Asian republics, which have largely supported Russia's position. At the same time, international sanctions have forced Russia and its partners to develop alternative economic and financial systems. The push to reduce dependence on Western financial networks has accelerated integration within the Russian sphere of influence. However, these same conflicts have also demonstrated the costs of challenging the international order. Many former Soviet republics are calculating that the risks of closer integration with Russia now outweigh the benefits, particularly given the economic costs of international isolation. One fascinating aspect of potential Soviet reunification involves digital and technological integration. Russia has been promoting alternatives to Western technology platforms, including payment systems, social media networks, and cloud computing services. The development of systems like Mir payment cards, vContact social networks, and Yandex services creates a shared digital ecosystem across much of the former Soviet space. While these technologies aren't exclusively available in former Soviet countries, their adoption creates new forms of integration that didn't exist during the original Soviet period. Digital connectivity also enables new forms of cultural and linguistic integration. Russian language content dominates online spaces across much of the former Soviet territory, reinforcing cultural ties that support political integration. Looking toward 2030, several economic scenarios are discussed by experts that could influence the likelihood of Soviet reunification. If global energy prices remain high, Russia and its energy-producing neighbors may have more resources available for integration projects. Conversely, a shift toward renewable energy could weaken these relationships. The development of alternative trade routes, particularly through China and Iran, could also change the calculus. If former Soviet republics can access global markets without depending on Russian infrastructure, they may be less inclined toward political integration. Some analysts note that climate change adds another variable. Water scarcity in Central Asia could force greater cooperation between upstream and downstream countries, potentially strengthening regional integration under Russian leadership. So, after examining all this evidence, what do experts say about the probability of Soviet reunification by 2030? The answer is complex and depends on how reunification is defined. According to most expert analysis, a formal recreation of the Soviet Union with a single government controlling all former Soviet territory is considered extremely unlikely by 2030. Too many countries have successfully established independent identities and found alternative partnerships. However, some scenario analysis and expert opinion suggests that much deeper integration of willing countries, primarily Russia, Belarus, and potentially some Central Asian republics, is not only possible, but already happening in certain areas. This integration might not use Soviet symbols or rhetoric, but could create political and economic realities that resemble select aspects of the former Soviet system. Many experts suggest one scenario for 2030 could involve a two-tier system, a core group of highly integrated countries centered on Russia and Belarus, with other former Soviet republics maintaining varying degrees of association with this core while preserving their formal independence. Whether or not we see formal Soviet reunification, experts agree that ongoing trends toward integration in the former Soviet space will have global implications. A more integrated Russian sphere of influence would create a significant counterweight to Western alliances and Chinese influence. For investors, businesses, and policymakers worldwide, these developments require careful attention. The rules of engagement in this region are changing rapidly, and what worked during the period of Russian weakness in the 1990s and early 2000s may no longer be applicable. The story of potential Soviet reunification reminds us that history doesn't move in straight lines. Countries and regions that seemed permanently separated can find new reasons to integrate, while unions that seemed permanent can dissolve overnight. As we watch these developments unfold over the coming years, one thing remains certain. The map of Eurasia is still being redrawn, and the final borders will not be determined by historical precedent alone, but by the choices that leaders and peoples make in response to changing global circumstances. What do you think? Are we witnessing the birth of a new Soviet Union, or just the natural evolution of regional cooperation in a multipolar world? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating geopolitical mysteries.